4 minutes is goodness. Okay. Okay, for those who have been to MAGMA's sessions in 2011, 2012, it's pretty much, I would say, a short form of that, right? So bear with me. Today we're still talking about standards, as I have for the last many years, right? So, okay, this is the 2012 list that I showed. What you have a pointer? No. What you can see, right? The last part, the telecom part, was actually not this, well, it was listed, but it wasn't approved. Now it's generally approved, right? So you can see Malaysian standards are covering pretty much what we use, from medium voltage, right? So you got your industry contractor cables, medium voltage. These are basically a copy of TNB standards, right? And then you have the LV cables, also TNB utilities, and also the contractors. And then you have the 450, 750 volts. This is the pretty much the main users, contractors, and nothing much on the utility side. And finally, telecoms. These are the fiber optic, and I think there's some copper cables there as well. Okay, so it's covering everything. And one of the comments we had earlier, well, a decade ago, was that there are no Malaysian standards to cover enough to cover. Now we have. So there are no excuse not to use it, right? Okay, this is the committee, right? Now I just want to, can you hear me? Yeah. I just want to mention point out to you that Malaysian cables standards that was issued in 2009. One of the new things that you will see, new even though it's like what, 5 years already, is that it is already having its own grade of cable, right? Some of you might still be using, I don't know, British UL standard. I want this, I don't know, type 9 cables, whatever it is. Now, in Malaysia, we already have our own type of WF. I don't know what WF stands for, but it's the denomination to identify our types of cables. The difference with our cables, for instance, and other standards is fine areas. For instance, in terms of product core identification, right? I think if you go outside the world, you got 1, 2, 3, 4. You got brown, blue, black, and so on. Now we are still maintaining red, yellow, blue, right? So it standardizes everything. So if later you want to change, we can always change. But this is the standard, right? Other than that, we have also standards for that you don't have in other standards. For instance, packaging. What you mark on the cable on the outside, and also packaging. Now, this is also an important part of that, which is not covered, say, by the IT standards. And finally, on the test. The test, obviously, we are covering pretty much all the IEC and British standards that are relevant, right? But there's no well, okay, thank you. There is no issues about testing, right? These are just words. Talks to you about when you do standard development. That's like what we did for the last more than a decade. You have to consider quite a number of things, right? Critical aspects, and the last part of it is you have to consider safety. The risk on safety, especially as That's one of the things, one of the items to consider. Right? Now let's just look at standards and cables. Right? If you look at high voltage standards, high voltage cables, right, up to 170 kV, you got the EHV, HV types. Now, in terms of its risk, it's almost no risk. Right? There is no risk. You buy cables or you don't buy cables. Normally this is done by utilities. And utilities have their own ways and means of control, type test and stuff. Now similarly with cables at medium, right, transmission and distribution levels. These are obviously covered by utilities and they have their own system of, their own standards, right, and specifications and systems of control and test. Then the problem starts. When you go below that, and previously you had British standards, right, and MS standards. Now you have MS standards, so forget about British standards. The risk here is high. Why? Because nobody checks. Okay? Now let's focus directly on that. What are the things, what are the types of cables we're talking about? The types of cables we are talking about, it's actually quite wide, but just focusing on the ones that are of high risk. Because these are the stuff that goes into your houses, my houses also, your factories, and so on, your offices, yes. Right? So these are the stuff you may not be able to read very well, but these are the types of cables, wires, cables and cords, 0.5 to 35 mm. These are control types of cables. Despite the control, you still have this sort of cables coming in from outside, which is rather strange. Okay? Now with that overall, look at again the risk. If you have MS standard cables, I already mentioned to you that we have enough coverage now, right, from medium voltage distribution down to LV house wiring and even telecom cables, fiber optics and stuff. So if you use that, we already have MS or MSIC. MSIC means we take the IEC standards and just stick on MS there. That means we comply totally to MS. Maybe add on a few things like packaging, colors and stuff. Right? But by and large, we also have MS standards already. Right? There are types of cables which are not covered by IEC, so we have to come up with it. Now, the code there is green, means that if you use MS standard cables, then it's green. It's okay, it's not a problem. Next is equivalent standard cables. You've probably heard this in the early days and also until now also. You don't have MS standard cable, or IEC or BS, yes, you can. Right? But it's code blue. Now, who came up with this code? Okay, never mind. Now, what are the problems here? It's wide-ranging dimension, unspecified phase ID. If you read the IEC, it just tells you 3-core and just put insulation on. Full stop. It doesn't tell you what color. It doesn't tell you min-max. It doesn't give you dimensions even. Some of the layers of coverings, it doesn't even tell you what thickness to put. So this is worrying. Right? So don't take these cables to IEC and you will comply. Yes, you will comply to IEC, but you may have the problem. Right? Similarly to British standards, well, it's British standards. British standards doesn't have packaging. British standards, the only way you can comply to British standards is to test it to British standards. So sometimes, why do you want to send cables to test bodies in the UK and so on, right? So, can you have later standards now? Then you have non-standard cables. Non-standard cables are cables, also to VDE, DIN, GIS. These are non-standard. Right? If you think about the American standards, you have equivalents, American wire gauge, and so on. You can use. Follow their catalog if they use this current and so on. Right? But it is, at the end of the day, by definition, is based on national standards. Right? It's based on national standards. Bodies, it doesn't, it's not concerned about our local conditions, our real requirements. It's just talking about, Now, one of the funny things about this is some of the standards here, because you can appreciate that we have, for instance, the German standards talk about very low temperatures, when you lay the cables. What low temperatures you have here, I don't know. So, sometimes people say, I want these kind of cables to BDE standards, and they go through 2 years of Arctic conditions. What for? Right? And who is paying for this? If not the users, right? So again, if you are in charge of the standards, look again. Some of it are not relevant anymore. And as I mentioned just now, you have the whole list coverage of nation standard cables for Malaysian conditions. Right? Now, similarly, I remember even last week people were talking about cables for the LRT. And inside there, they talk about 3 meter cube test. What 3 meter cube are you talking about? And do you understand the 3 meter cube test? Why do we have it in the first place? If some of you, I'm sure most of you have been to London, going underground London, right? And if you watch carefully, next to the rails, you have like a little box. That is the size of the 3 meter cube test is that. And what happened early days is that most people like me smoke along the rail, the underground, and throw their cigarette butts. And what you have in those little compartments there are papers and combustible stuff collected because of the strong winds and movement of the trains, right? So when somebody throws a cigarette, it burns. And that's where the 3 meter cube test started. We don't have 3 meter cube in our system, so please take it out. And there are also other tests. I'm just giving an example, right? And finally, substandard cables, which by definition, the standards are unknown, right? It's market-based requirement. What do I mean by that? You will see later on. And it's called there. Non-standard cables, as I mentioned, are constructed to other standards, which may not comply to local requirements. Right? Sometimes you pay higher. And, substandard cables, not designed, constructed, don't know what text, so can't really comment very much. Right? Quickly on the elements of cable, I'm not going to talk about this. This is a 2-day course anyway. So remember, conductor, insulation, protective layer, and you have the cable. Such an easy construction that so many people want to make. Now, anatomy of substandard cables. Right? These are actual samples that was taken 2 years ago. Right? And we did the anatomy. And what we found, this is not very interesting. This is, let me start with the physical part. When you look at the cable, right, how to differentiate? You will look at, from the outside, the diameter. Where's the diameter? Total diameter, where is it? Overall diameter of the cable. So actually, if you make it to the standard, it's a bit smaller, but these are substandard cables. It's actually bigger. Right? So if you look at the cables, it looks much the same. Right? Does it not? Yeah.
Yes.
Now, try looking deeper. Am I going out? Sorry, I'm going backwards. Okay, now you look at electrical properties. Aha, right. If you look at electrical properties, the main thing is the conductor. Right? The conductor carries the current and so on and so forth. The low voltages, well, we're talking about current. And if you look at that, your standard is 731. What is this? Area. Right? And look at that, look at that, and look at that. Now, remember this point. cables of this type, the copper price is 70–80% of the price of the cable. So if you make substandard cables, where do you think you want to cut down? Conductors, of course. But once you cut down the conductors, you pretty much cut down on the cable, because the heart on the cable is the conductor. Right? And look at the current rating. Now, I calculate this myself. 7.5, 6.5, 1.7, goodness. But nothing happened, right? Yes, nothing happened. Of course. Not in the short term. Not in the short term, yes. In the long term, something can happen. Right? Short circuit rating, of course. These sort of things you cannot detect. Right? Sometimes in your house, wiring starts to blink. When your lightning strikes, and why? Every time lightning strikes, I already check my RCCB, MCCB, all okay, right? It's the highest, it's the lowest sensitivity one, still blinking and still shutting down. And start checking on your cables. And voltage drop. You understand voltage drop? Voltage drop means that the cables here has to be much shorter, because this is what happens. You are allowed a 2.5% drop to the standard. So if you buy this particular cable, you are able to run 14 meters. Right? Look at this one. Goodness. 3 meters a year. 3 meters only. Right? And you can hardly detect this, because more often than not, you only use 3 meters to your equipment, to your peti ais, your TV, 3 meters. If you try by right, if you buy it properly, 14 meters, from here I can put TV probably downstairs. Right? You've gone through the physical analysis. Again, as you can see, in many ways it looks the same, right? Or you look at the weight, right? It's lighter. So maybe the weight, obviously, because copper is quite heavy, right? It's the heaviest part of the link. So maybe it's a good indication. If you look at the MS standards, inside there they have dimensions, diameters. As you can see, diameter is not a good indication. Look at the weight. The moment they cut down on the weight, it's going to be pretty evident. Cost analysis, interesting. A standard cable, let's say, people like myself and some of my friends here, zero margin. We just make cables, non-profit, right? So somebody wants to make profit. Now again, this is actual. This particular guy, nice guy, but he wants to live, so he cuts down a little bit and gets 4%. Fine. Look at what the other two guys do. 76%. Every $1 you put in, you get back your $1, and you get 76% and 76 cents extra. Now look at this guy. Every $1 he gets $2. My goodness. But again, I'm telling you, this is actual. These are real cables in the market. So the question is, the answer is, the conclusion is, it's a lucrative business. Let's look at the problem itself, the conductors. What happens? Metal content not specified, undersized, construction not in accordance. This is technically what can happen. Non-compliance will result in conductor overload. Condition lead to breakdown, blah, blah, blah. These are some of the things that I hear when talk to people. Try to be honest, why you buy these cables now? I think, why is it smaller? Now, that was 30 years ago. Now, surely they can make it smaller. No such thing. There's no technical improvement on conductors. Right? 0.5 mm square until now 0.5 mm square. It cannot be now, become what? I don't know. It cannot change. The standards have changed. The standards have changed a little bit. Not so much. Someone says, last time copper not very pure. Who said? You read at the British standard 1938. We already tell you copper 99.9%. Aluminium 99.7%. How much can you go from 99.9 to improve the conductor? No. That was 70 years ago. So nothing has changed. The rest, okay lah. Your insulation has improved, your techniques of manufacturing has improved, but the standards, no, they have not changed. And this is the biggest problem. When you lay the cable, there is no problem on it. It works. That is the biggest problem. Now, remember my slide earlier, when I said high voltage, no risk. Medium voltage, not so much. When it comes to low voltage, the risk is higher. Try to relate this to these statistics kebakaran. Where do you have these cables of high risk, meaning? Kediaman, kedai, right? Look at it. The highest numbers, obviously, there. The highest numbers are there. Right? The rest here, I think our contractors are good and honest, and they use proper cables, right? So, or oversized cables. Non-standard cables, they go DIN standard now, whatever. It's okay, it goes, right? Or maybe you don't have DIN MS standard last time, now you do. But for these kediaman and kedai, I don't have the statistics for fatalities, right? Because I hear that it's quite also alarming. If you look at the fatalities, oh goodness, why do we allow this to happen? Why do we allow this to happen? This one I cannot do anything. Dengan dia bakar, I cannot do anything. Right? But how many of these? This is just kebakaran. Sorry, let me correct myself. Just kebakaran. It can be about anything. But cables is one of the major punya. And normally when these things burn out, what happens if it's totally burned? No evidence, all gone already. Right? Now that's another myth that I did not put in here. Cables are basic infrastructure. Right? When you put up a building, sometimes you have to lay the cables first. Right? Because you cannot put up the building and then later on break down some walls to put cables, you cannot. So you put the cables first. So principally, the cables must last longer than your building. And you must insist on that. There is no such thing. I hear last time, you must change your cables every 5 years. Who told you that? Who told you that? Did you know that the cables underground, at the underground, talking about the London Underground, have been around for 100 over years until they had the King Cross problem, then they started. But that was a different problem. But the cable itself can last that long. And we had also, well, these are high voltage cables. Some of the oldest cables in Malaysia. Sultan Yusof Dam. Somebody sent me and said, hey, I got this sample. 1965. Please look, we think we want to change. I said, why you want to change? People forget to change this. Forget to change. So I cut the cable, this is okay, right? And kita mana dekat Cameron Highland, dekat Johor and Wolf. These were cables that people made last time. They were so proud of it. They put the cables in the tunnel and they put their name on the plate. These cables were they installed. Wow. What about 100 over years? 100 over years. So your cables must last 100 over years. If it doesn't, then most likely substandard. If you go to a car show, you can see all the car, Ferrari, so, and with it, you can you can imagine the prices. But when you buy cables, like I said just now, it's all the same. How can you differentiate? So there's some work that you need to do. Right? This is one of my care tactics, so just ignore that. Treasury in Malaysia, they said this in 2002. I'm going to spend 30 seconds on this. I have 3 minutes left. Okay, get the point? Very important this one. They already said this. If there is Malaysian standard, when they said this in 2002, we didn't have Malaysian standards. Right? So when this came out, what are you talking about? Okay, now we do. So now you're going back to this. You must. Right? And if you are a government body, remember, there is a surcharge. I don't know what that means. If you are a contractor, this is what will happen. the way forward. I'll give you 15 seconds to read this. We have done number 1, we have done number 2. Number 3, we have been fighting all these years. Number 4 and 5, we need your support. Right? We need your support. Because we have local manufacturers here. Right? It is an industry consisting of how many thousand of workers? Right? I don't know, 80,000 workers or something like that. Right? And we are surviving on razor thin margin, and this is for real. Right? But we cannot keep fighting this. If you want to buy cables yang non-standard from Japan and so on, go ahead. Right? But don't forget that those cables are not suited to our conditions. Fine. But we have now standard our cables. Right? And we have a check and balance system where members of MCMA, if they make substandard cables, they will be thrown out of the association. That's first level. Second level, anybody, even if you are not a member of MCMA, ST will hound you. Right? The third level, tak boleh. The third level, as I said, when there is a fire, everything is burned, the evidence are all gone. So, by then, it's too late already. And finally, look at all the wonderful cables made in Malaysia. There is no excuse. Thank you.